So Bitcoin is a global and universal ledger, and will improve and change how we store and consume and monetize data. And to write data to that blockchain, we need the Bitcoin token. This is what gives it utility. And its limited supply is what gives it intrinsic value, and that's why it is such great money. Now, of course, because it's great money doesn't mean immediately that it's easy to use. And at Centbee, we've passionately focused on trying to make it easy for people to get Bitcoin and to hold it, and then, of course, to use it and spend it, so we can start using all these incredible projects and applications and businesses that are coming online. So we've had a multi-pronged approach. You know, we think of ourselves as an ecosystem company, a payments ecosystem company. And the first part of it is, how do we now get people to acquire Bitcoin? That obviously is a great challenge. You know, every business that we've been hearing today has that challenge. Typically, people have to go to exchanges and so on. And that's been sort of quite a big barrier to entry in terms of how people access Bitcoin. But you know, we created a product where people can now go and buy Bitcoin at most retail brick and mortar locations across South Africa. And we've actually managed to achieve a comprehensive coverage across the country. And that's formed the basis and the foundation for now all the products that we're going to be, that we are building right now, and into the future as well. And that, of course, is going to create a market now for Bitcoin companies to start providing these MetaNet type services. But a very important thing is not just the acquiring of Bitcoin and then the holding of Bitcoin, it's also the using of Bitcoin, the spending of Bitcoin. So again, we're focused on payments. We want people to be able to use Bitcoin as money. I've been passionate about the money use case for almost the last 10 years that I've been involved with Bitcoin. Obviously, being Zimbabwean, you know, I saw how finance is so important, and when it becomes fragile, we need something more stable, and that's what Bitcoin presents to us. But what I want to talk to you about today is a major next step in our strategy. And the greatest use case, and in fact, you know, when it comes to trying to pitch a Bitcoin idea, building a MetaNet service, you know, you have to try and convince investors, as we've heard, you know, why does this fit the market? What's the value proposition? And the value proposition around payments is self-evident. You know, down in Africa, this is where I live, right at the bottom over there in South Africa. What we have is South Africa is actually an incredible country. It's the African superpower. It's the largest economy, and that means that a lot of people come down from other countries across the continent, and I'm hoping that my presentation can skip and we can see it. So there's South Africa right at the bottom, and what we see is millions of Africans across the continent moving down into South Africa because that's where all the jobs are and all the opportunities are. But now that naturally leads to the next thing, where these people now need to send money back home. And it's well known that in Africa, it has the most expensive cross-border remittance corridors. But not only that, there are all sorts of barriers. You know, there are high, as well as the high costs. There's the complexity around actually moving that money, filling in the forms, and we have a lot of undocumented people living there. And also the available vendors that provide these services, like the banks, of course, charge a lot of fees and require a lot of KYC information. There are, of course, little fintechs that are now coming along and trying to make that process easier, but because they depend on the existing banking rails, you know, they have pretty much the same problems. And also, they are trying to create agents and vendors around the country where people can go to and then be able to move that money, and they use all sorts of mechanisms. But this is where the real opportunity has always lied for Bitcoin. You know, it's a cliche. You know, cross-border remittance is going to be disrupted by Bitcoin. But of course, the next question is, well, how are people going to get that, and how are they going to manage to move that? And this is now what we've managed to tackle. Because we have that, as I said, this comprehensive coverage across the country, and that's what it looks like. If you go into Centbee Wallet and you go to South Africa in the map, you know, you're going to see that there isn't a single stretch of the country that we haven't covered. Even the smallest little towns across the country have multiple locations where you can go into the store, hand over cash, and receive Bitcoin instantly. Not even, you know, hours later or days later, but instantly on your Centbee wallet. So this is now our gateway. And now we can start creating this ability to move that money. And this is what we've done. So the first corridor that we've opened up is Nigeria. Now, Nigeria is the second largest economy in Africa. It's 165 million people, and of course, you know, there are plenty of Nigerians living in Southern Africa. And we've decided that what we're going to do is we're going to now open up this corridor, and we're busy running this pilot right now. And once we have got the data and all that sort of thing, we're going to, of course, open it up to the other countries. And what we do is once people actually go and acquire that Bitcoin, and I'm going to show you how that actually works, because we don't need to educate the customer how to actually use Bitcoin. They don't even know that they're using Bitcoin. What we have is we've got a very simple app, and I'm going to show you how that works right now, and you're going to see the potential. But what we do is we use Bitcoin as a rail. You see, that's the very important thing. So a customer will go into one of those locations using our Remit app, which I'll show you, and they just say, I want to move 500 Rand, which is about 50, let's say 50 euros, and that's generally the size of the amount of money that they want to move. And by the way, the amount of money that moves from South Africa is quite incredible. I mean, just to Zimbabwe, for example, it's over $1 billion a year, and of course, we've got all those different countries. But a user will go into the store, they'll say, I want to now move a small amount, under 1,000 euros, to this country, and what we do is we then use our purchase system, the Barcode purchase system. And if you want to know more about this, please go and look at my talk from Toronto CoinGeek, and you're going to see how that works. And what we do is we use Bitcoin as the rail. We then send it to a partner that we have, a local partner in these different countries, and they convert it directly into local currency at the exchange rate, and deposit it directly into the bank account. And we can do this within a few minutes. So as a customer walks into the store, they then will decide to now go and move that money from the moment that they actually create the transaction to the moment that it arrives in the recipient's bank account. That takes under 5 minutes, and it's an incredible solution. So let me just talk to you about how it works. Now, we've got a product already. It's available in the Android App Store. We call it Centbee Remit, but we've actually had great interest from large money transfer operators who want to white label this solution, and we're quite open to that, of course. You know, this is an entire business on its own, and we're quite eager for large-scale money transfer operators to go and actually use that. But the way it works, I'm just going to give you a few screenshots over here so you can see, because I want to tackle some of the important things that you have to consider when you are actually moving money cross-border. It's not just a case of creating a Bitcoin transaction, sending it across cross-border, and so on. You know, there are a lot of implications around it, and specifically regulatory implications. And I'm going to want to spend a little bit of time about how that works and the insights that I can give you. So obviously, one of the things there is, and you can't really see it, but the user gets to create a recipient on the application. Now, what they have to do is they specify, they put the name in, they put the bank details in of the recipient, and what we do is then we do a validation of that bank account. A very important thing, because there is a regulatory requirement about that. And then once the recipient is verified, then we can then go and create the quote. So the user will put in some local amount, let's say 500 Rand or 1,000 Rand. We will then use the fiat exchange rates to give them this quote. Obviously, we've built in our fee structure in there, but obviously, because it's Bitcoin, it has incredibly low fees. We create that quote. That's when the rates are calculated. And then the barcode is generated. Now, this is the Centbee innovation that we created that allows people to purchase Bitcoin. But at this stage, you know, the user doesn't know that this is Bitcoin at all. As you can see, we haven't mentioned Bitcoin in the slightest. All we're doing is we're presenting fiat rates, fiat quotes, and now what we can do is we can give them the Centbee barcode, which would then do the purchase of the Bitcoin in the background. And once they do that and they execute that transaction, what we then do is we then transfer that Bitcoin, although there's another solution that we've cottoned onto, which is even quicker than that. Essentially what that is having a float account in the other country, and what we can then do is pay out of that float account in local currency directly into the bank account. That means that because we're doing a local bank transfer from bank A to bank B, we don't have that cross-border international payment, international settlement and clearing process that happens. So this process, if you actually were to try and see it, you don't even have to be walking. You can still be in the line at the cashier when you go and create that transaction. As you walk off, before you've even left the store, the money is actually in the bank account on the other side. Now, this is incredible because first of all, the ability to use Bitcoin as a rail is self-explanatory. You've cut out all the fees, and also because it's Bitcoin, there are some regulatory requirements that now you don't really have to be so concerned about because you're not actually doing any foreign exchange, and that's the magic of Bitcoin. But this is a significant step in actually making Bitcoin useful as a payment rail cross-border, bringing down the costs, and also making it a lot more convenient for the customer, because now they don't have to go and fill in all that information. But this is what I want to now spend the last few minutes on, because obviously, all that I've just said to you is pretty much the product, and it's working right now, and we're going to be incredibly disruptive. I mean, if you just think about the banks and Western Union and so on, the average fee for an international cross-border payment within Africa is 15%. So we're going to be able to bring that down drastically. But not only that, it's the whole convenience of it. It's not just about price usually, it's the convenience. How easy is it for me to be able to go into the store and without having to fill in a whole lot of complex information, be able to now create that transaction. And then of course the time. Because typically these transactions, for the vast majority of those services, take several days. And now what we can do is we can do it in minutes. I mean, it is so phenomenal. We're so excited about it. And this is going to be what we believe our primary revenue product. To be able to disrupt cross-border remittance within Africa is so significant that it's quite wonderful, and we're very excited about it. But now let me just spend some time on the insights and the lessons that we've learned and the issues that we have. And of course, first and foremost, it's regulation. Because if you haven't heard about it already, the Financial Action Task Force, which is the sort of organization that publishes these recommendations to countries and banks around the world on the types of regulation and the compliance that needs to happen for a product like this. When it comes to what they call virtual asset service providers, in other words, crypto wallets and crypto exchanges and so on, they are going to be enforcing, or at least prescribing, that banks and countries around the world enforce the same sorts of compliance that banking has to do, which means that you're going to need to know your customer, of course, and you're going to have to know the recipient as well. So Centbee was always built with this idea of compliance. I have a long history in crypto, in fact, for many years now, dealing with central banks and governments and all around this regulatory stuff. And my co-founder, Angus Brown, has many years' experience, not only with bank-backed digital currencies, but the regulatory issues around it. So we've built Centbee with compliance first and foremost in mind. And when it comes to our products, the whole KYC issue is very important to us. So when we sign up our users, we do require some information, and then we do all the required sanction screening, name scanning, and so on. And then what we can do is we can raise flags, and we can address those as it needs to happen. But then, of course, having to know the recipient's information, that's a very important thing. This is a bank requirement. Now, of course, it's going to be extremely hard for crypto companies themselves to be able to do this, because if you think about it, using PayMail, which actually is a good step in the right direction in terms of knowing the recipient's information. Normally when you do a Bitcoin transaction, it's an address. It's very difficult to know who that recipient is. But having our partners being able to do the bank verification and so on, we are already now set up to be fully compliant by June 2020, which is when FATF are saying that all these crypto companies are going to now have to follow the same obligations in terms of compliance. So think carefully about this. If you are a crypto exchange or crypto service provider, these things are going to become imposed upon you. And it's, even if you don't follow them, the banks that you engage with are going to require that the businesses that they service, the crypto businesses, do that. We already see how banks are starting to put pressure on crypto exchanges. You can see how some exchanges are having to delist currencies like Monero and so on because of these very issues. Now, another thing is a difficulty that we have found is the liquidity, because it's one thing to say I'm going to move Bitcoin to a different country, but of course you're going to need some kind of liquidity pool somewhere. You're going to need a demand. You're going to need people to be able to purchase that Bitcoin, and obviously SV is on the back foot because of all the exchange issues. No one is listing BSV and so on, but we believe that this is obviously going to change. And obviously is a vital key to this whole puzzle. If we want to move money to a country, we need to make sure that there is a demand for Bitcoin. Otherwise, it's difficult to try and convert that into fiat. But then also your partners. An issue that we have is competency, and that means that we need to have exchanges that are obviously legit, have a technical competency and so on. This is something that we see. There's a lot of demand for Bitcoin across the continent, but not many countries have good teams that are building the software. I often dream about companies, and this might be an opportunity for you to actually create an exchange in a box that you can now sell to some body in a different country, and then they can set up the exchange and then be able to provide the service to their customers. So you see, there's a lot of issues. I mean, of course, if the world is perfect and we had the liquidity and we had the demand and we had the technical competency, this thing would just take off. And I do believe it's just a matter of time. But if we make sure that we stick to all those rules and regulations, then there's not going to be any reason for regulators to want to stamp you out and give you trouble. And that's what we have found with our own regulators. Because we've been so open, willing to comply with anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing, they're quite happy to see us exist. It's not a good enough argument to say, look, if you don't allow us to do that, it's going to drive it underground. Regulators aren't persuaded by that argument. But in the last minute, what I want to also just give you some insight. I've been Centbee is now operating well and in South Africa, and we are starting to reach out to mainstream audiences, non-crypto audiences, through mainstream channels, radio campaigns, and so on. And we've actually had a lot, obviously on Twitter and in those crypto communities, we get a lot of trouble from trolls, people who really are trying hard to stamp us out. But in South Africa, it's been clear that Centbee is making fantastic inroads. We are literally available in just about every supermarket and so on where you can buy Bitcoin. And when it comes to promoting yourself as a BSV company, we get a lot of offline trolls, calling us a scam and, why are we stealing the Bitcoin name? And, I've always been very assertive about Bitcoin being the original protocol. It's the right thing. BTC has changed, and BSV is the only true Bitcoin. And I haven't found a lot of success. And one thing that I've decided to start doing, and I think it's actually making an impact, is to do what every other company does when you have a competing brand, is to focus on the positive benefits of Bitcoin SV. It is clear that it is so cheap to move money using Bitcoin SV, and it's so instant. And we're now starting to change our offline campaigns, our above-the-line campaigns, to acknowledge that, yes, there are different Bitcoin versions out there. And in a way, what we're doing is, instead of trying to assert ourselves as the only Bitcoin, to dilute the other brand Bitcoins out there by focusing on the positive benefits that Bitcoin SV can give to people in terms of transaction fees and so on. So I urge you to maybe think about it in terms of that, instead of trying to anti-troll the trolls and trying to maintain your dominance in terms of the moral high ground that we have, that Bitcoin SV is the original. Focus on the positive aspects of Bitcoin, acknowledge that the others exist, and let the product speak for itself. So thank you very much. I think that's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.